Welcome to Horror Makes Us Happy, the podcast where we ask the question, what is it about horror that makes us happy? Your hosts are Steve Becker and myself, Chris Whitman, and you can find out more about us at our website, horrormakesushappy.com. Before we get started, this is the trigger warning. This is a horror podcast, so we're going to be talking about horror things and horrific things. And I mean, we could talk about horrific things. It's not a definite, but it's a possibility, so we do have to do this disclaimer. So there could be sensitive subjects involving violence, child abuse, bad words, SA. Those things are potential, but that's not really what the show is about. It's really more of a fun psychological delve into what it is people actually like about horror and why they like these things about horror and those things.
Yes.
Things. Right, Steve? Also the things. Yeah. With a disclaimer out of the way, what do we got coming up?
Same thing as usual. Talking to more people. We've got probably about 6 or 7 people on the calendar. Trying to get more people on. We're hosting 3 events on our Discord weekly. So if you're on Discord, come find us. The link is on our website. If you go to the website, it's horrormakesushappy.com. We have a Linktree link on there, and you just click that one link, and it'll give you like 20 different things that we're involved with. So you can find all of our social media and all that kind of stuff there. But today we are talking to Mr. Jamie Flanagan, author, writer, producer, and actor, best known for Midnight Mass, Dr. Sleep, and Blind Manor. Welcome.
Hi, thanks. Good to be here.
Our pleasure. Before we get into the meat of the interview, you want to let us know what you're currently working on?
At the moment we're working on an adaptation of Stephen King's Carrie for Amazon.
Nice. That'll keep you busy for a little while.
For a little bit, yeah.
Well, I don't know if you've gotten a chance to check out any of the other interviews, but basically what we do here is we talk about your love of the genre from childhood through adulthood, and then at the end, talk about any common themes that might crop up during the conversation. But that said, is not meant to be a therapy session, so if there's anything you don't want to answer, just say pass and move on. That said, starting with childhood, what are your earliest memories of scary things?
Yeah, I think the first the first scary thing I can remember was there was an episode of the Smurfs, and I think there was an evil horse with red eyes that kept me up for weeks. No idea what episode that was, but man, that stayed with me for a while. That would be the first time I remember seeing something that scared me.
Not the first guest that we've had that's mentioned things that are supposed to be whimsical and fun childhood cartoons that actually inadvertently end up being evil and terrifying.
Yes. But I actually vaguely seem to recall something like that. That's going to bug me now. I'm going to have to go look that up. But the one that I'm thinking of, I don't know. It seems darker than would have been in Smurfs, but maybe. Who knows? Anything else jump out to you?
I can remember one of my earliest, not one of my earliest nightmares, but it's supposed to be the earliest nightmare of which I have memory is I was trapped in a maze being hunted by an alligator that was also the sheriff. So it had the law on its side, which, that's extra frightening when you have no legal recourse.
Right? It's doubly frightening. It's a creature that can kill you, but also it has the law on its side. And I have to ask, could it talk? Or was it just an alligator that, like, the rest of the police department just listened to? Like, it would just hiss and they'd be like, yes, sir.
In the dream logic, I never delved that deeply. I was just too busy running through the maze knowing that the alligator sheriff was out there. I don't know that we ever actually crossed paths.
Okay. Yeah, it's one of those implied dream things where you understand the peril and the danger in your mind. It's just like, this is bad.
Yep.
First thing that brings to mind is the Disney movie for what was the King Arthur Sheriff of Nottingham?
Sword in the Stone.
Was it Sword in the Stone? No, the one with where Robin Hood was the fox.
Yeah, Robin Hood. Yeah.
Wonder if it was somehow related to something like that.
It very well might have been. That was one of my favorites as a kid. So I could see how that got its way in there.
Yeah, but I was about to say better than alligator than a snake, but I don't know. Let's see. Did you participate in Halloween as a kid?
Yeah, we did, but we didn't do too many scary things. We did like leprechaun outfits, and I think one year I went as like Gambit, like I don't know, X-Men type stuff. Yeah, if you take a piece of like black pantyhose and cut a hole for your face, that's the Gambit headset pretty much right there.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
So a little cosplay tip for you out there, if you're 5 years old or even older and looking to play Gambit for a day.
Yeah, that'll work. Any least favorite costumes?
Least favorite costumes. I went as Rambo one year. I was like 10 years old. And part of that costume is the sort of rubber pecs and rubber abs that they kind of throw over you. That was probably my first brush with like gender dysphoria. Just being like, this does not at all feel like the person that the non-binary baby that I eventually became. So it's it's one of those weird moments of just being like, this doesn't feel right. So probably that one. Probably that was my least favorite.
I imagine that adds to the feeling too, especially when you're wearing this fake version of that on top of you. Like,
yeah,
well, it
like
does feel fake.
It's odd because you're already performing, masculine standards based on, growing up, in my case, military Catholic. And then on top of that, you've got Sylvester Stallone as Rambo being draped over you. Yeah, it sends a message. And you find out real quick if it feels like a natural fit.
Right. That's kind of interesting. It's also, in a way, maybe endearing is not the right word, but like, how can I say this? It's clarifying, which it can be a good thing. Instead of having that, I don't know if I want to use the word dysphoria, but being confused for a very long time. If it's introduced to you early enough and you go, no, that's not it. it's the clarification can be a good thing.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, I was one of those people that just floundered for like 20 years trying to figure this stuff out because, Catholic school and military Catholic house, you just don't have the vocabulary or the role models to know what it is you are or what's wrong. You just feel deeply that something is off for many, 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 many years until you get out into the world and, they pull back the veil from your eyes. You get to see diverse people and then figure out if you're one of them.
Yes.
So I'm a big proponent of maybe make that available to people earlier in life.
What's funny is as you're talking about that, like I'm relating to that, not even in the non-binary sense. My grandmother was the head lector of our church. And before he passed away, my grandfather was one of the deacons. And they were obviously very devout. We went to church quite a lot. And I remember in my 20s, I happened to be watching TV at my grandmother's house through on PBS, and it was an series of interviews with Joseph Campbell, where he was talking about all these different kinds of mythologies from all over the world and how they were related and borrowing from each other. And some of the things that he talked about were Christianity had borrowed things from other mythologies. And after the thing was off, I turned off the TV and I turned around to my grandmother, who was sitting around the corner at the TV. And I can't remember exactly what I said to her, but like I was really fascinated by all this and blew my mind and wanted to talk to her about it. And she just shut down the conversation. She was like, I don't want to talk about it. It's blasphemy. And I'm like,
I'm sorry. Yeah. I feel your pain. I feel it. I feel it keenly.
It was cool that I got to, like, how can I say this? Having that experience was the clarifying moment for me. Like, holy shit, there's so much more out there that I didn't know about.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. We talk about like Joseph Campbell and the power of myth, and you take that and you compare it to the first hour of a Heretic. And for an hour of Heretic, I was like, I'm on Hugh Grant's side. I'm pretty sure that he's pretty sure this man is entirely correct. And then they take it in a very different direction. But,
of course. Yeah.
That was pretty much my take from Heretic. Loved the first 2/3 of the movie, and then it was like, oh, okay, now you're just a kidnapper.
Yeah, right. I was really kind of thrown for a loop on that one because the first hour really did feel like a call to dialogue about something that is entirely true and entirely ignored by a large subset of people to all of our detriment. And then they did a hard right turn into, oh, right, he's the bad guy. So
right. It's almost like the writers were like, wait a minute, I forgot, he's the antagonist. We got to do something bad.
Right. It's the weirdest turn in that movie. But man, do I love that first hour, and am I glad to see Hugh Grant just break the mold. That was really exciting.
And please return to more horror. Like, can maybe get a reboot of Lair of the White Worm.
Ooh, yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
We recently talked to, I think it was Neil McRobert of the Talking Scared podcast. He said the same thing. You loved the first half of the movie, and then the second half, he was like, eh.
Yeah. It's an opinion I've heard certainly within the family pop up too, because you've seen Midnight Mass, so you'll have figured out, I'm sure, Mike's take on on organized religion and where it fits and how it fits in the world. It's a big problem, and probably will continue to be so for decades to come. So we can pat ourselves on the back, but sadly, the problem is still there.
Yes, and will be for a while. That's a good segue into. It's a little funny story here. So a couple of years ago, we interviewed Spider-One, who is the brother of Rob Zombie, and I normally try to make it a point not to research our guests so that it's the conversation is a bit of a blank slate. I personally feel that whatever comes up first to mind usually comes to mind for a reason, and then we just go with that. But I knew him from being the lead singer of Power Man 5000, and at the time that we were getting ready to record, I thought to myself, I don't want to make a faux pas. Let me double check to see if he was like the original singer of the band. Went to the Wikipedia page. Turns out he's actually the only original member of the group. Everybody else has kind of changed over the years.
Wow.
But while scanning the wiki page, I happened to see a note that he's Rob's brother. And then I'm like, shit. Because I was like, fuck, how are we going to make, it's going to come up. Like, is there some way that we could work around that? Because obviously I want the interview to be about him. And I eventually set the thing to the side and thought, I'll mull on it and maybe something will come to me in a couple of days. But then I realized one of the questions that we always ask all of our guests is, was there somebody else in your family who was a fan of horror?
And it came up. And of course, it was like, it's impossible to avoid the awkwardness with that. And if I recall correctly, it was like, well, it's funny you should ask.
Well, his answer was, that's a very sly way of asking the question. And then I shared with him the experience that I had, doing the research, and he laughed about it. And actually, point of fact, it turned out after we edited the call, I went back and I realized we only ever referenced his brother by his first name. So this is the first time talking about it, I think, on the podcast. But if anybody listened to that didn't know that they were related, they'd have no idea who we were actually talking about.
Yeah, could be Rob Corddry for all you know.
Yeah, but in your case,
we didn't. I don't really have an issue with it. I didn't go the Emilio Estevez route. I didn't change my last name. We're sort of inextricably linked there, and. Of all the work that I've done, all but 2 projects in film and television have been with Mike. So I don't think it's really possible to talk about my work in television without bringing up my brother, my relationship to him, and how that informs the work that we get to do together.
It sounded. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, please go ahead.
It sounded like Spider and Rob had a good relationship too. It was just funny how it came up, but. Mainly the question I was going with here was, focusing on the childhood aspect of it, maybe Mike included, but was there anybody else in your family who was a fan of horror? Was Mike a fan of horror at that age? Like, how did that process?
Mike's love of horror, or he and I really kind of having a dialogue about that, really kind of came from reading Stephen King short stories and stuff like that, and recommendations of movies and books that he'd give me as we were growing up. And I think for a while there, even though he was a big fan, he tended to lean towards character dramas and romances. I remember back in college, he was making kind of relationship indie films, like one was called Make Believe, another one which does have a supernatural element was called Still Life, but he didn't lean into horror in terms of what he made until he made Oculus, the 30-minute short. Which was just one guy in a room with a mirror for 30 minutes. And that ended up being blown up into the feature, which is, 90 minutes of sibling pair and a bit of a larger world. As much as we were fans of horror growing up, I don't think either of us saw ourselves heading into that space. I think Oculus for Mike, and then Absentia, which originally, that indie film was just meant to be a collection of pieces for the actors' reels. It was never meant to be a feature. It just kind of grew into one over time. Our DP was our brother-in-law, Rustin Cerveny. We shot it in Mike's apartment and in the tunnel directly adjacent to Mike's apartment. It's funny how horror became the thing. And I think he really cemented himself there with with The Haunting of Hill House. And then after that, he was in the genre, but already had this deep love of character and deep love of, just relationship drama that has fed into his work ever since. And I love that kind of stuff. I went to school for theater. I love Chekhov, being able to write about quotidian people having everyday problems. There's something really lovely about that. Just pointing at Bly Manor, I think my favorite episode, or my favorite bit of an episode that I got to write was in Ep 2, where the protagonist, Danny, has a panic attack and is just slowly talked down by Jamie the gardener. That scene to me is exactly the kind of thing that I love to write. At the end of the day, it's about people. And I think Stephen King gets that, and we definitely grew up reading him.
So just for clarification, it's some of the stuff you were just talking about there obviously happened later in life. When he was sharing the Stephen King short stories with you, would you consider that childhood or teens?
More teens,
mixture?
I think. Yeah, teens and college.
Okay.
Prior to that, horror didn't really hit the radar as much. He was really big into the Untouchables when we were kids. I remember, and I tell this story every so often, but it's always nice to kind of revisit it. The Alligator Sheriff story, that nightmare of mine. At the time, he and I were sharing a room. I was really pretty young. I can't remember, somewhere between probably 4 years old and 8 years old, somewhere in that range. And I woke up from it. I was crying my eyes out, and to calm me down, Mike told me a version of the story in which I got to be brave. And I kind of think that has stuck with both of us from childhood to now, even in horror, is that storytelling is an act of care. And that if we do it correctly, there will hopefully be something at the end of it that offers people some chance at healing the things that frighten them, not just leaving them sort of in a bereft and hopeless space.
Yeah, that's good. Using it as a tool, as a healing tool in a way.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, because in a way that kind of describes some of our interviews.
Love that. That's great. Yeah. That means you're doing the work of humanity. And bravo.
There've been a couple times where we disconnect and Chris and I'd stay on the call, and Chris is like, I think we might be helping some of our guests.
Yeah.
Which is, like you say, it's a good thing.
Couch sold separately.
Yes. Yeah. So got Halloween.
I think we covered nightmares.
Continuing on the childhood stuff, I'm going to ask a pair of questions here. We'll start with the negative one so that we can end on the positive one. Do you remember the first person you hurt?
Yeah. Oh, man. This is brutal. Okay, so I was at a retreat. It was a summer retreat. And I was with my family, but, during the day, they split off the kids and the adults. The adults go do whatever adults do on retreats, and the kids, hang out together, canoe or seesaw. I was on a seesaw with another kid. And we were seesawing up and down, and they outweighed me. So, towards the end of it, they had me up in the air there. And then they were just going to step off and let me fall. And they did. And it hurt a lot. And I called them a name, and it made them cry. And that has stuck with me ever since. That is a formative moment for me. Weirdly enough.
It's funny how those childhood moments, just burn themselves in your memory, isn't it? I mean, technically they were at fault, I think, because they hurt you physically first.
Yeah, they have agency for what they did, but calling them a name that made them cry, even on the day and to this day, never made me feel better about it. Mm-hmm. And I wish I hadn't.
Fair enough.
Strangest thing, but there we are.
Okay, that works. Do you remember the first person you helped?
First person I helped. Probably my friend Becky, who was sort of my companion from first through probably 8th grade. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that was just the person that I threw in with after school. We'd be, running around, kids on bikes and hanging out at a strip mall and that sort of thing. And yeah, Becky was the person that I would throw down for and then in any circumstance defend. So that's probably the first.
Okay. I'm going to do another pair of questions here. Was there ever a time in your childhood when you were terrified of something in real life?
Yeah. We had been tasked with learning I think it was the Gettysburg Address.
Okay.
And, it was due the next day. You had to get up there. And I'm sure it wasn't the whole thing.
In one day? Okay.
No. Oh, yeah. Well, we had more than one day. I'm sure we had weeks. And I'm sure it wasn't the whole thing. It was probably just a couple of lines from it. This was early grade school. And maybe 3rd or 4th grade. And yeah, I had what I can only look back on as a complete panic attack at the prospect of having to stand in front of people and deliver. Yep, that scared the crap out of
me. I can relate. My grandmother actually made me memorize the Gettysburg Address, not for school, just because she wanted me to.
Oh, ouch. I'm sorry. That's brutal.
You will memorize this. Why? Yeah. When am I going to use it? Doesn't matter.
That and all the capitals of the 50 states, which don't ask me now because that was a long time ago.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah, we had come up with some kind of song or mnemonic device. Forget what it was, but it was.
No, I didn't get that. It was just sheer memory.
I could have used that as a child. I just learned / confirmed the capital of Canada the other week.
Oh, wow.
It's not Toronto, right?
That was my excuse for not remembering the capital of Canada is because I only had to remember as the states. Canada is not a state. So flipping that last question around, was there ever a time in your childhood when you felt exceptionally calm or safe or at bliss?
Calm, safe, at bliss as a child. I'm sure there were moments, and for the life of me, I can't think of them. I think that's kind of the tragedy of youth, right? Is the things that stick in our memory are rarely the calming, soothing, everyday kind of beats. We lose those. I think maybe, given that I can only remember a couple of instances of really feeling uncomfortable or really feeling at odds with the world around me, means I probably had a long stretch of safety. So that's pretty good. Pretty grateful for that.
Yeah. Actually, the first thing that came to my mind was what you told us about Mike telling you the version of that story where you get to be brave.
I like that, yeah.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Thought I would ask the question anyway because you never knew if something else would have come up, but that was a good little moment.
Sure, yeah.
Moving into teenage years. So you mentioned Event Horizon. Was that during your teenage years or later in adulthood?
Oh, wow. This is where my sense of my sense of time gets lost.
Okay.
I have a lot of trouble. If you ask me when Lord of the Rings came out, not only can I not tell you, but I think I was about 4 different ages when I saw it. And I guess that would make
3
sense.
Different movies, so
yeah, and then the Hobbits. That probably makes sense. But I'm really bad with chronology, really bad with time.
Okay.
And couldn't say.
So anything else jump out to you from teen years in terms of either horror or maybe not even necessarily horror, if there was something else that was more important to you?
Oh, in teen years, like high school, I was really into just the theater department back then, and just finding a voice that sort of gave me a place in that tiny, niche of society that high school is. So I think that was it. That storytelling and that theater in general gave my teen years structure and shape that otherwise it wouldn't have had. Yeah.
Any particular media though? Movies, books, plays, maybe?
Movies, books, plays. The first one that comes to mind is Rent. That was huge when I was in high school. That was everywhere. And heck of a musical for the time. And there's still so much to it that's resonant. There's parts of it now that I think feel dated, of course. But I still think there's a lot there to mine for value. And it certainly just broke down doors and barriers for the time that it was made. It's just a shame that the creator never really got to enjoy its success.
I wasn't aware of that. Something happened. He passed away, I guess.
I believe he did, yeah. And if I'm getting this right, he did so before Rent became a phenomenon.
That is sad.
Yeah. It's one of those things, right? We tend to appreciate artists after they're gone.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, well,
one of those things.
It's a mix of good and bad. Obviously, you wish that people could see the benefits that their work has created. Of course, on the other side, then there's at least the benefit that it has helped people. In your case, was there a particular scene or character that stood out to you?
Oh, I think was it Angel? Is one of the earlier versions of just LGBTQ plus representation. I know there's a ton of that in the show, but that character, of course, stands out because it was a pretty strong character and Yeah, just not something I was used to seeing. Again, having gone through Catholic grade school, Catholic high school, that was just an entire kind of person that hadn't been in my world prior to seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for something like that is absolutely priceless. And having that sort of representation is key to anyone. We all want to be able to see ourselves reflected in storytelling, because there's a comfort in knowing that people like us have come before and that people like us will come after. And
Right.
I think that when we sort of homogenize what sort of protagonists that we make front and center, we rob people of the ability to see themselves in these things, and they learn to aspire to things maybe that they really aren't, that they feel that they should be, and that costs people months, years, decades of authentic living.
Mm-hmm. I went to high school in New Jersey, right across the river from New York. And so Rent was pretty popular. I think I'd already gotten out of high school by that point. I think I might be a few years older than you, but did you want to say something?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I think, I was in Maryland when I learned about Rent, and it was just because the soundtrack was making its way through all the theater nerds. And by then it had already had a pretty far reach. I graduated in 99, so this would have been somewhere between, so somewhere before then, when it kind of made it into my sphere. But it certainly, I think, had an impact on so many of the kids who went to that school, and I think by then had already had its big boom moment, and it had gone national.
I think you sharing that reminded me what I was thinking of. So when I lived in Florida, one of the reasons my father got a job in New Jersey and moved us up to Florida, or up to New Jersey, was because the high schools in Florida there were some that were more focused on arts and some that were more focused on science. And my father wanted me to go to a school that was more focused on science, but I was living in an area where I would have gone to the one that was more focused on arts. And I think I was thinking about that in terms of, kind of like what kind of school did you go to, and how that might have played into your interest in theater. Although, for example, the place I went to in New Jersey also had a theater department. So, there's that, but it just wasn't the main focus of the school, for example.
Sure. Yeah. And our theater department was certainly not the focus of our school. It was just my focus at school. It was a pretty niche thing. I think if Archbishop Spalding was, focused on anything, it would probably be, the sports teams, but that's pretty common, I feel, across the board in America. We tend to prize sport more than art.
Yeah.
And then we tend to use art as sort of it's something that we sort of throw on the background these days to keep us from the pain of the banality of living.
It's a nice hobby, but you can't do it for a living, kind of thing.
Yeah,
Reminds me of a meme I saw the other day that was like two graphs side by side, and one was what is it, irreplaceable or essential jobs, like the top 3 essential jobs and the top 3 non-essential jobs, and the top 1 non-essential job was artist, and then the third panel is one of those meme faces, either dead inside or crying. It's like the artist who drew this graph. Like, not essential. Yeah. We're not important.
Yep. Yeah. That's just how we treat these things these days, which is a real shame. But that's art has always been there, will always be there, and it's never really been something that I think made it easy to make a living. So we knew what we were in for when we signed up.
we just stand by silently salty. Like, yeah, no, it's fine. It's fine.
Well, as you said earlier about, storytelling being an act of care, there's heart in it. So,
I think it's essential.
Part of it.
Yeah. I believe that storytelling and art are essential to any functional society. It's how we learn to understand ourselves and each other. And without it, we lose humanity pretty quickly in the equation. And you see it time and again. One of the first things that regimes love to do when they're crushing people is to attack culture and get that out of there. And it robs people of a sense of identity.
There's a thought.
I know, right?
Well, I was just thinking about, like brutalist architecture and, all the different ways, what's the word I'm looking for? Communities, different sectors of art. Cause there's architecture, there's painting, there's graphic design, there's all these different art forms that, people don't necessarily think of in terms of art, but are in a way. And I'm just thinking, how those things had changed in previous generations and how they might be changing now to allude a bit.
Yeah, I mean, ours is the generation of Marvel, and for better or worse, we're going to be remembered for spandex tights and a whole lot of the hero's journey, and how many different ways we can recycle, recan, and repackage it. So yeah, it's a weird time, but we also have some pretty great stuff out there in the film and television space. We've got one thing, Severance, I think, is incredible. Interview with the Vampire, that adaptation is probably my favorite show in the last decade. There's stuff out there that rises to quite a high bar, but unfortunately, we aren't really in a renaissance or boom time for indie cinema or nuanced work. We've leaned into something a bit more fantastic on the surface, but empty on the inside, which is a bit of a shame. But I'm going to go see whatever new Marvel movie they put out. I eat them like candy, so I can't really complain.
It's a bit off topic, but on the topic of indie stuff, even that has, because of inflation, the dollar numbers have shifted so much to what's now considered an indie movie is still like a $50 million movie. It's like,
right? Yeah, $50 million budget is a quote unquote micro budget.
Yeah. I was shopping around a script that I thought would be a fun indie spec about these two ghosts in the woods. And I was like, oh man, we can make this for nothing. And then I realized, it's like, well, Act 3 does have that forest fire. That's probably going to be pretty expensive in post. And yeah, we ran the numbers on it, and they're like, this is no longer an indie flick. This is going to be, if anybody chooses to make this quiet relationship drama between two ghosts that includes a forest fire, it's like I don't think it's ever going to get made, and it's because it's too expensive for how small the stakes are. Because the stakes are entirely rooted into whether or not one person or the other gets to have peace. It's which I love. That stuff pulls me along. You sit me down in front of Hulu's Normal People, and I watch it like a sport. Every tiny gesture, every inhale and exhale of breath that's subtextually driven, where the stakes are entirely, will this person feel okay? I am there, and I will invest in it. But, people tend not to invest money in that kind of thing these days. They want something flashy or something showy or something where the stakes are global. And, that you get that a lot in notes. Can the stakes be larger? And
you were just talking about Marvel movies.
Yep, exactly. And that's the thing is, you can't really say to an executive, what are larger stakes than one person's experience if it devastates them, and their response to that is to blink, look at you like you have 5 heads, and then say, well, what if that meant that the planet would blow up? It's strange days that we live in, but this is it. You can't really tell a human story without also tacking on, also Thanos might kill half the population.
Yes.
We
can't tell a story for just one person. We have to tell it for 500 million people.
Exactly. The algorithm does not like things that are small, or that level of intimate. They want something that will appeal to a wide audience to bring up their streaming numbers, and we get that. But at the same time, we're losing some nuance in translation.
Yeah. Did you have any scary dreams or reoccurring nightmares as a teen?
Reoccurring nightmares is, I have a teeth one where your teeth come out of the socket like chiclets, and just kind of you kind of just keep them in your mouth there. Terrifying. I had that a bunch of times, and I think it has a meaning. I looked it up once and have since forgotten it because I have the memory of a goldfish. But
I want to say it's loss of control on that one, isn't it?
Power. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Definitely, I think in my teen years, a sense of powerlessness and loss of control, right on par for the American teenage experience.
Yeah.
That would be the most frequent recurring nightmare that I had in my youth. I don't really have nightmares that recur these days. They tend to be isolated one-offs with plenty of distance between them. But they do tend to involve being back in places that I've since left, and a feeling of being trapped there and unable to move forward.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, like old jobs, things like that. You'll just find. I used to be an ultrasound technologist for about 6 years. I worked in a community hospital, and it's a noble gig, but it does a lot, to you when you're scanning people who are usually in some stage of heart failure, and a lot of which you're scanning them shortly before they pass on, and you're dealing with the families, and the families, they're in a lot of pain and they have a lot of questions, but you're not a doctor, so you're not allowed to answer any of them, even the ones that you know. So that was a tricky position to be in because you wanted to help but felt like you couldn't. And that, I had a dream recently where I was back in that environment, and that was rough. That was a tough one.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I actually was supposed to be a radiology tech, but things happened differently. I went to the administrator's office to talk about some classes that I was supposed to take the next semester, and I picked up this little pamphlet that was on the table next to me that had different certificate programs, which I hadn't looked at because I had only looked at things that gave you degrees, and at the particular time, the field that I'm in now there were no degrees associated with it. It was just certificate programs, but that's a whole other story.
Oh, I feel you. Yeah. I got my bachelor's in theater, waited tables, tended bar. Then I went back to school, did the medical prerequisites, did a certification over 2 years for the ultrasound gig. Before that, I abandoned a med tech certification because I just couldn't square myself with sticking people with needles.
And the reason I went for radiology tech was because it was the least invasive of all the things.
Exactly, right? Anything superficial and external, I'm like, sign me up. But
yeah, that works.
Yep. Was there ever anything in real life that scared you as a teen?
Yeah, I think it was like maybe first year of second year of college, first year of college, when the Twin Towers fell. That got me. And I remember I went to give blood on the day and never made it in because the line to give blood was, around the block. But it was a surreal day. I remember I had slept in. My friend James Doyle, who was living with at the time, knocked, woke me up, and was like, one of the towers just got hit by a plane. And I thought I was still dreaming. I was that half asleep and hungover at the time. I went back to sleep, and then another knock. He came in, woke me up again to tell me the second tower had been hit, and then I got up. That was just an absolutely surreal time. And for as spotty as my memory is, that morning and the afternoon after just are like crystalline in my memory at this point. Yeah, those solidified. That was probably the scariest thing I can. I'm sorry, you guys. This is a horror podcast, but all my stuff's rooted in just the real world trauma.
I mean, sometimes the real world can be the real horror, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I know audiences get tired of that sometimes, but unfortunately, that's the world we all live in. So that's what I keep pulling from.
Yeah.
So we have sort of three goals with our podcast. One, obviously, is people who are fans of your work can come here, you share things that maybe they haven't heard you share before. The second goal is that, we don't shy away from difficult topics. And if something comes up that's real life and is difficult, then we address it as healthy as we can. And hopefully listeners will get some benefit out of that. Maybe it'll be the first time they've heard somebody talk about something in a healthy manner. And then the third thing is, we wonder if after talking to enough people, will we gather enough interesting data that's statistically relevant that we could then hand back to mainstream society to say, maybe not everybody falls into the same bucket, but what are the buckets? How many are there? which ones are most common, least common, that kind of thing.
Yeah, look, I'm all for analyzing the horror community. I'm a big proponent of therapy, so I would love to know any insights y'all come up with, and I will pass them on to Chris, my very excellent therapist. So yeah, please do and keep up the good work. I feel like that's a valiant effort.
Thank you. Yeah. So flipping that last question around, was there a time in your teens where you felt exceptionally calm or safe or at bliss?
Yeah. I was playing John Proctor in The Crucible in my senior year of high school.
Okay.
And I was a tiny little nerd. I was like 100 pounds maybe, and I had I guess compared to some of the other kids, I just had a deeper voice with better vocal control.
Mm-hmm.
So they threw the role at me, and prior to that, I'd always been side characters or whatever. And to be up there and to dive into Arthur Miller and deliver it on stage, it felt really wonderful, and a nice cap off to a high school experience in which I had felt largely marginalized, and it was interesting to be trusted with something like a leading role at that time. I remember that was one of the first times that I felt that I'd been asked to step up to do something, as opposed to just put in a place where it felt natural to put me. Because I need to underline this: I was not a good John Proctor at all. I was like if Jim Carrey had done John Proctor and was 14 or 18 years old. No, I was horrible. I had no understanding of what I was doing. I had no nuance.
You were the least bad John Proctor.
I was the least bad choice they had that year, and I was a deep voice that had diction, and yeah, the fact that I was up there like feeling like this was the most zen experience. That's probably not what you want to hear from someone in a tragedy. Like you probably want that person to be emotionally invested. I was just so happy to have a role where I could speak. So yeah, it was very peaceful, but probably they could have done better.
Yeah. Well, there's the important aspect of, like you were saying about helping you find your voice. And this was an opportunity to do that. Just like for some people, being the quarterback on the football team is their opportunity to rise to an occasion. This was yours.
Absolutely. This is like if Rudy got on the field and then just failed miserably. but that he didn't mind at all and was just happy to play. If that was the moral of that movie, they're like, we finally put Rudigan on the field and he sucks. Like that's right. How this story
over.
Would have gone.
That's it.
Okay, so more what's the the Ducks, the hockey movie.
Oh, I was gonna say the
Mighty
Bad
Ducks.
News Ducks, but that ain't it. The Mighty Ducks is the Mighty Ducks. Absolutely. Oh man, I was also a terrible hockey player there for a minute. I had seen the movie The Cutting Edge starring Moira Kelly and D.B. Sweeney, so I picked up figure skating and then was encouraged to take up hockey because I presented masculine. Right. And then I ended up just being a terrible hockey player who really missed figure skating.
I wonder. I'm certain that there are people out there who will relate to that, and some of them might actually currently be hockey players.
Yeah, if any of you hockey players out there were like, yeah, my parents put me in here because they thought that I wanted to be D.B. Sweeney. I really wanted to be Moira Kelly. I feel like that. There are people out there who can definitely relate to that. And yeah. It's never too late to, throw on the skates that still have a toe pick. Go for it.
Like I said, I'm sure there would definitely be some people out there who will appreciate that.
I hope so.
Let's see. Rolling into adult years. Now, as an adult, what are maybe the first top 2 or 3 things that pop off the top of your head in terms of horror media or stories or books or plays?
Oh yeah. I remember really getting into Bag of Bones by Stephen King and loving the intimacy of it, how small the story was. He's communicating with his dead wife via the letters on the refrigerator there. And there's also something else that occasionally moves the letters. That setup alone was terrifying to me. And again, the stakes of it were like one person, a ghost, and then an entity we didn't understand. And that to me was terrifying and wonderful. I really loved the book Dreamcatcher, and then I saw the film and wanted to gouge my eyes out.
Was the book vastly different than the film?
Definitely in presentation. Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of the story beats that are the same. I guess it just read better than it played out on film. But yeah. Oh, Dreamcatcher. Oh, that movie. Sorry.
So what'd you like about the book?
Oh, I liked the group of friends aspect to it, and how they're sort of invaded by the gray man, and yeah, it sort of warps one of them over time. And when you look at your friendship groups and how you grow apart, I think there is a sense sometimes, especially in the people who grow in directions that are both unexpected and maybe negative, that it's hard to recognize them anymore. And that idea that you could take a book and have that happen, but then be able to blame it on something alien, something outside of human nature. There's a comfort to that, as opposed to just being like, no, Jerry's a dick now,
Right. No, it was the aliens that made me be an asshole. That's what it was.
That's an episode of South Park. It's the wizards, right? It's the evil wizards turning people into problematic abusers. Absolutely. There's a comfort in externalizing those things and being like, if we just figure out the solution to the alien problem, then I'll enjoy talking to Joan again. That was pretty neat. One of their books. It's going to crush me to talk about. I used to love Neil Gaiman. It turns out he's horrible, and I've just recently taken his books off the shelves, and I
still don't want to believe it, but there is just so much damning evidence, and it's a thing.
The accounts are pretty. I read the Vulture article, the most recent one that popped out, and the story of the nanny as she shares it. Like I just can't. I cannot. I can't give him the benefit of that doubt. Like, I just can't do it. Because if I'm wrong, then I've backed someone who has done not just harm, but egregious harm. And nope, can't do it. And there's too many people coming forward for me to write it off, right? Like, and people do that with big public figures all the time, usually presidents. They're like, 30 women, who cares? But, we put an artist up there and we hold them to account. I wish we held that level of accountability to everyone. And unfortunately, we don't seem to be able to do that as a larger society. But yeah, Neil Gaiman did it for me for a while. I used to adore Ocean at the End of the Lane for its simplicity, for its look at the loss of childhood, for the holes that we develop as we grow and how we try to fill them. And now looking back on that one, given what I know, and you take a look at that, which is, I think that it's been mentioned more than once in interviews that for him, that book is somewhat autobiographical, obviously fantasized, but autobiographical. And I just can't look at the character the same way, knowing that he grew into a monster and he wrote that piece while he was that horrific version of himself. So I'm like, wow, man, you had the introspection to realize that what you were doing was fucked up, but you didn't have the morality to follow through on it. Like it's just so disappointing. But getting off that one, loved Tagana by Guy Gabriel Kay. That's a classic, about how to erase a people and the consequences of doing so. In that book, if you've never read it, there is a kingdom called Tagana that has been magically erased. Memory of it, the word itself, has been stricken from the world by a second larger kingdom. And so these people, they sort of meet in this dream space where they remember what their society was. And it's a battle to get it back. And it plays out like a tragedy. Like, the end of that book is Hamlet. It's incredible. It's just the body count in the last stretch of that book in one event is just jaw-dropping and cathartic. And you look at like Israel Palestine, and I'm like, yep, there's Tagana right there. Right now it's Palestine, and they are gonna keep trying to erase it, and we'll see how that goes. But yeah, it's that a wonderful book. If you get a chance, highly recommend it. I know it hasn't really been too much in the zeitgeist in a while, but other books that I've really enjoyed that have kind of a horror bent to them. This one's more of like horror comedy, I guess. But the Locked Tomb series, if you're familiar with Gideon the Ninth, Harrow the Ninth, Nona the Ninth, by Tamsin Muir. I've been reading those recently, and they are an absolute joy. It's about lesbian necromancers in space. I laughed. I cried. That series is incredible. The first book plays out like a gothic murder mystery. The second one plays out like a intimate study of trauma, and the third one is kind of about a wartime apartheid. As genre-defying books go, the Locked Tomb trilogy is an absolute magic trick. And if you get a chance, I highly recommend picking it up.
Apparently, it's going to be a quadrilogy as well. There's a fourth one.
Yeah, Alecto. We're waiting on Alecto. Originally, Nona, what became Nona the Ninth, Nona was meant to just be like a couple of chapters of Alecto, and it grew into a whole book. So it has the opposite problem of people like, George R.R. Martin, who were like, I meant to write a book, and it turned into nothing. Whereas Tamsin's like, set out to write a book, and it turned into 2 really good books. I can't wait. This is excellent. You could argue that George R.R. Martin kind of did that with what was it? Did Dance with Dragons, I think, split into 2 or something, but I don't know, man. I used to really be into those books, and then something about the weight really killed me. And then, of course, I felt like the series didn't really do Daenerys or Jon Snow justice, or that relationship, or the point of the prophet. I don't know. The whole thing just felt like a spaghetti cannon by the time we got to the finale.
The only headcanon that I have that makes any sense to me is that I think George told D&D what his ending was going to be, and they did everything they could to not do that so that his ending could still be a surprise.
Well, then I look forward to it. Okay. Yeah, also, Patrick Rothfuss has got to come out with Doors of Stone to finish off the King Killer Chronicles, which was Name of the Wind and A Wise Man's Fear. I love both of those books, even though, and Patrick, I do hope you're listening. You need help writing women. Please, please meet a woman, talk to a woman, maybe let a woman take a look at the book before you release it, because every woman in those books is like a cardboard cutout of a woman that he wants to date. And does he
fail the Bechdel test in like 2 pages?
Oh, yeah. Bechdel wept. It's absolutely. And I adore those books. I love the story. I love the narrative. I love the protagonist. But man, anytime his version of female characters kind of pop up and exist on the page, he immediately describes their beauty. And I'm like, oh, dude, no, just let them be people. If every male character you introduce doesn't begin with, he was beautiful. Beautiful like the sunset. Every female character gets that treatment. And I'm like, Jesus, guy, come on. You can just let them be people. Just they don't have to be goddesses. They can just be people. That would be nice. But I still hope he finishes Doors of Stone. I understand it's a tall order because, I can barely write a short story over a 4 or 5 year span until it gets to the point where I feel comfortable like giving it to someone to publish. So I really don't have room to speak in terms of how long it takes to produce prose. But I hope we do get to see Doors of Stone. I hope we get to see Alecto the Ninth. I hope we get to see the Winds of Winter. I would love it if we could finish off these stories in the lifetime of the people who've been consuming them. King ran the risk of not doing that with Dark Tower for a minute. Had that huge break in there, but he followed through and finished strong. And that story's out there. Dark Tower exists for anyone and anyone who wants to read it, and it's absolutely a pivotal genre piece, and essential if you want to understand the rest of King's work. It's like the keystone that kind of links them all together.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
Yeah, it's lovely. It's wild. I mean, it's a view into one man's head, and that head is full of pop culture. So, and it's pop culture of the decades in which those books were written. So, there's lightsabers in one. There's something pretty close to a golden snitch at one point. Like it's there's weird things that pop out, but there's Wizard of Oz in there. There's all sorts of stuff. but yeah, what a gift King gave us with that, and so glad we still have him around, and that he still has over the course of time proven to not be a terribly abusive and horrible person, because some of our celebrated authors tend to pop out that way. So yeah, props to Stephen King. May he reign long and well.
Yes. So we talked about scary dreams or recurring nightmares as an adult. Have you ever been terrified of something in real life as an adult?
And I feel like it's probably a pretty common answer. I'm terrified of imagining, just for myself, existing alone for decades and decades on a stretch. I'm terrified of watching folks like me who come after me sort of get buried by the world being shitty. Mm-hmm. I'm terrified for my nephews and my niece. And the older they get, the more scared I am for them, the less scared I am for me. It's weird, it's how these things shift. But most of the things that frighten me the most are pulled from news headlines. I'm not afraid of a dark room anymore. I'm just afraid of a room full of men making choices for other people. Real life is more horrific than fiction at the moment.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it is.
So, going to repeat these two questions that we asked earlier, again, starting with the negative so we can end on the positive. Do you remember the last person you hurt?
Whew, that's a good one. The last person I hurt, and I'll keep it vague, but it's a family member.
Okay.
A family member who supported the current regime in power, and whose choices, directly or indirectly, led to the erasure on a federal level of the identities of people like me. And I gave them an earful, and I could tell that they didn't land well. And while I know that I should, and that's important too, they needed to hear that. On some level, that needs to be in the back of their head percolating, because it's the consequence of the action that they took. It's like the seesaw. Still don't feel good about it. Still don't think I'll ever feel good about it. I know that and the difference here is that this one I can look back on and say I had to say what I said.
Yeah.
But I don't think I'll ever feel good about it. And I think that's kind of the rub of where we are today, is that harmony in a lot of family situations requires repression of self in order to get by. And I had been doing that for a long time, and I finally had to say something, because the consequences as severe as it's been over the last few months. So yeah, and I'm so sorry I just cut you off. Continue. You had a thought.
No, I'm just saying sometimes things like that, have to be said.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
There was a time in my 20s when I had picked up a book completely by accident. I mean, not by accident, but randomly. I was waiting in line, and there was a book next to me, and the title of it was something like 50 Management Mistakes and How to Avoid Them, or something like that. And it was just a curious title. And I was flipping through it while waiting my turn in line. I don't remember exactly what I read, but I remember coming away with my own verbiage of it that helped me remember it, which was basically that on certain things, it is more important for me to make sure that you understand this detail than it is for me to know that you like me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's better to have an authentic connection than a harmonious one based on omission.
Well, the visual image that I got when reading that was also like a child running out into traffic. When you yell at the kid and you scare the kid, and the kid turns around and cries because you yelled at them, it's maybe an unpleasant situation, but I'd rather have you not be happy with me than run out into traffic and get hit by a car. It's like,
yeah, no, I get that too. Absolutely. Yeah. It's a wild, complex world out there right now.
Yes. Yeah. So flipping that last question around, do you remember the last person you helped?
Yeah. My friend Beebs, that is the nickname they go by. And Obviously, I can't go into details, but I had the privilege and the honor of getting to listen to them and to hear them express something they needed to express, and that to me is such a wonderful feeling to be able to be there for somebody else and to hear them and to let them know they're heard and to let them know they're supported. So I got to do that this week. And Beebs, if you're listening, anytime, my friend, and thank you for trusting me with that.
That is nice. Let's see. So the next two questions are not going to be about horror, and it could be anything, and not just any particular time of your life, but over your entire life. What movie would you say you have watched more than any other?
More than any, The Cutting Edge, starring Moira Kelly and D.B. Sweeney.
That one on deck.
Yep. The figure skater who turns into a hockey player. I've watched that many times throughout the years, and man, do I still love The Cutting Edge. Still holds up. Moira Kelly, still a queen. D.B. Sweeney, still a prince. We love it. So yeah, that's probably the one I've seen the most. In terms of horror genre, I think the one that I've probably come back to more than anything else is A Tale of Two Sisters, which is a Korean film. If you get a chance, check it out.
Yeah, I got to rewatch that one.
Yeah.
It's been a long time, and all I remember is they were conjoined twins that were separated.
Oh, no. The Tale of Two Sisters is based on a folktale about the evil stepmother folktale. So these two sisters are brought to a country home with their father after the passing of their mother. And in this country home is their new stepmother, who used to be their mother's nurse. And of course, the evil entity is the idea that the stepmother has somehow usurped their place in the household. It's a terrifying and wonderful movie, Tale of Two Sisters. Definitely check it out if you get a chance. Do not see the American remake called The Uninvited. It is absolutely terrible, start to finish. And I'm so sorry to everyone involved with it, but normally I don't like to speak ill of anything, but Dreamcatcher and The Uninvited, I'll make exceptions.
Noted.
There are exceptions that need to be made sometimes.
Yes, absolutely. So that's the horror movie I return to most.
Okay. Let's go back to Cutting Edge for a moment. Other than potentially self-identification with some of the cast of characters, is there something else about, or anything else about the movie that makes it your most watched, or is that the main thing?
Oh, I think it's just comforting to me at this point. That story has been with me since the first time I saw it, which is a fairly young age, and just keep revisiting it. It's camp, it's certainly. It is just a comfortable romantic comedy about ice skating. And that one is that's my comfort food.
Okay. So now if we were to ask what is your favorite movie, would it be one of those two, or would you pick something else?
Oh, I'd pick something else. Favorite movie is You Can Count on Me by Kenneth Lonergan. That stars a very young Mark Ruffalo and Laura Linney, and it's about a pair of siblings whose parents die in an auto crash in their youth, and the sort of the stray sibling comes back to visit his sister and his nephew, and it's entirely just about the interpersonal dynamics of two people, in which the stakes of every scene are just their emotional well-being. It's a wonderful movie, and I adore it.
That just sounds downright wholesome and heartfelt.
It's heartbreaking. I mean, I weep in that movie. It's so good. It's a great cast. Matthew Broderick plays a villain in it. He plays the boss of the protagonist at the bank that she works at, and he's just a complete asshole and does a great job. So if you want to see another side of Matthew Broderick, go see it. If you want to see early Mark Ruffalo before he got hit by gamma rays, go check that out too. And Laura Linney, you can't get much better. She's a wonderful, wonderful voice. And anything by Kenneth Lonergan. I mean, the stage work from Lobby Hero and what was it? This Is Our Youth. I think I don't know that this was his first movie. Maybe it was, but it's definitely my favorite of his. He writes and directs, and he plays a priest in it and does a lovely job in that role in creating a priest that actually feels like they care more about the people around them than dogma. And I kind of feel like that's what we need from priests.
I thought you meant the movie Dogma.
Yeah, then the movie Dogma, yeah.
That too.
Most priests in fiction and literature are just too big fans of Kevin Smith. I don't know why they keep doing that. But it's great. If you get a chance, you can count on me. Highly recommend it. You can probably find it streaming somewhere. If not, I'm sure you can get a DVD off of like Amazon or something.
Okay. Turning back to horror for a moment, do you see any common threads of what kind of horror you like? Cannibalism, occult, metaphysical, supernatural?
I like anything that makes me sad. That's if the horror makes me sad, then it usually takes a seat as like one of my faves.
So horror that makes you sad is the horror that makes you happy.
Exactly, you got it. Perfect. Nice. And that's not to write off any bits of the subgenre. I've seen Terrifier 2 and had a great time, but I tend to lean towards something that makes me feel something other than just the adrenaline of fear.
Yeah.
So
no, I get that. It's chicken soup for the emotional soul.
Exactly. Yeah. If you can make me cry and make me feel afraid, then that's something I'll come back to.
You said something that I like the phrasing of a moment ago. Feel something other than, and I don't remember what you finished it with.
Oh, just the adrenaline of fear. Because I think there's certainly, and it's not knocking it, because I know that as escapes go, there's no wrong escape. Mm-hmm. But there's a love of sort of like what we call the torture porn genre, I guess, which would be like Hostel or the Saw films, and I'm like, those are a visceral attack on the senses, and that's kind of how they function. They're not there to make you feel something emotionally profound. They're there to shock you and get your heart pumping and hit you with a rush of adrenaline. And nothing wrong with that. I tend to steer clear of it because I usually come out of those situations feeling like I just had a really strong cup of coffee, but like I'm the size of a chihuahua and all I do is shake. So they're great. Yeah. And if you have a constitution where you're like, well, I love caffeine, I can handle that, then it's all yours. But I usually tend to like the ones where I'm scared for a bit and then by the end I'm weeping. Give me Babadook, Tale of Two Sisters, or scary movies that make me, at the end of it, make me feel something cathartic.
Okay. So this would normally be the spot where we talk about common themes that have come up and then maybe talk about that a little bit. It seems like the overwhelming one for you is emotional health, is how I would summarize it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely an emotional health junkie. Big proponent of therapy. I think everyone should be in therapy. And
I don't disagree.
Yeah, it's a challenging world, and whatever you need to help you process and get through it, I feel like you should embrace. And of course, I'm going to put that in storytelling, and of course, I'm going to seek that out in storytelling because, just like anybody else, I want to feel okay. And that's kind of a tall order these days.
I was just about to ask a follow-up question of why do you think that's important to you, but I think the phrase you just said really sums that up very nicely.
It really does.
I just want to feel okay.
Yeah, it's that simple.
It's like the whole I don't know if it's a physics or an existential theory, but word. Yeah. But the resting state, like we all have a resting state, and that's what we're subconsciously driving towards. My resting state is I want to feel okay.
Yeah.
Just comfort.
Finding some kind of Zen space, some kind of peace. I think that these really charged emotional stories let us work through emotional knots.
Absolutely.
It's like getting a massage. There are parts of it that are uncomfortable, but at the end of it, you feel great. And I'm like, that's what I love about horror. There are parts of it that are very uncomfortable, and then at the end of it, I usually feel great.
It's an emotional detox. A cleanse.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's one way to put it. I was thinking, how can I say this? So to flip the other side of the coin, if you say, I just want to feel okay, well, then that means that the current state is not feeling okay.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I think that happiness and I feel like peace are, for most people, and maybe this is a blanket statement that could be wrong, but take it for what it's worth. I feel like happiness and peace are rarer than we're taught to believe they are. I think a lot of media presents happiness as a default state. I don't think it is. I think it's harder to come by than that. I think it comes in the small doses that it does, and in between we struggle, and that's okay. That's the human experience. But there's something to be said for trying to seek it out, for chasing peace where you can find it, and sometimes that means front loading a lot of sadness to get you to a place where you feel like it's past.
What you said a second ago about happiness being harder to come by than we think, my first thought to that was, I don't know that it is, but I think that we are blocked from it by the lessons that society has taught us. Maybe one of the phrases that I learned in recovery is this phrase, never let anyone shit on you. And when I first learned that, like, it really opened my eyes to all the different ways in my life I was being shit on from a million different directions. And until you really stop and start to do that work, and start to notice that, it becomes a lot more readily apparent of why it's harder to find happiness, because there's always somebody somewhere, sometimes even the voice inside of you, telling that you should be doing this, or you should be doing that, or you shouldn't be doing this or that.
Yeah.
And learning how to filter that out is a big part of being able to find peace in a particular moment, is just being able to set aside all the shoulds in the world.
I love what you said there. And I think the root of that is shame. I think that there's an entire mindset that is pretty dominant, at least in the country that we live in, that bases the foundation of life on the concept of shame, from original sin all the way through the sin of adulthood, and everything you're going to do as a teenager. That it's all steeped in shame, and you find that too with the LGBTQ community these days. Like that again, it's yeah, no, it's shocking, right? Yeah. But that seems to be the goal. Is the same sort of way of thinking still wants to attach shame to those ways of being, of existing, of living, and yeah, it's hard to filter that out. There are trans people who are transphobic. There are. Yeah, it gets really awfully confusing and difficult. I just feel like ideally, I'm not sure that basing an entire religion on shame serves anyone, except for someone who really desires an easy way to control a large population.
Back to heretic. It is all about control. It's the one true religion, right?
It's funny that you say that, because what I was thinking of is one of the other things that I've learned about shame in terms of, the counseling and 12-step stuff I've done. For me, I really like to visualize shame as almost like a judo move where you're using somebody's energy against them. For me, shame is somebody else telling me that I should be ashamed of something that they ought to be ashamed of.
Yeah, even to put it in psychological terms, it's displacement, or what is it?
Projection.
Yes,
projection. There you go.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah,
which, as Chris just said, is also an element of control, and that's why they do it, is because I'm trying to control you by making you feel the thing that I ought to feel.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. I agree. It's wild. Here we are. It just
hits home even more with the whole concept from Heretic about how control is the one true religion. Control is the one true drive, really.
Well, we're seeing it now. A new way of thinking takes over, and the first thing they do is exert a large amount of control to see how much they can get away with, and what they can't control, they shame.
Yeah.
So here we are.
Yeah.
Here we are.
So the next question.
Can we not be here?
You're right.
I want to be like 4 years from here.
Right. Yeah, I would love that.
It may not necessarily be a better thing.
Yeah.
Dude, one day at a time.
Yeah.
So the follow-up question here, I think the answer might be readily apparent, but I'll ask anyway, not to put words in your mouth. But so why is this important to you, this topic?
Oh, wow. Because I think that everyone has shame. And I think that, certainly, and for certain things, there's a healthy amount, but I think that most of us carry far more than we should, and for no purpose. I think it just serves to breed unhappiness and to and resentment. I feel like shame and resentment, like you said about projection, they kind of swirl around each other, and then it just becomes a game of passing it to the next person so you don't have to feel it yourself. And it's just a cycle. So I think that's a predominant challenge of the world we live in today. So yeah, that to me is why it's important, is because it's a daily struggle to figure out what you're hearing, why you're hearing it, why is it being directed at you, and then once you have it, what do you do with it?
Yeah.
And the easy solution is find someone else to hate and beat them into the ground. That's the easy solution. The harder one is process, filter, take in what you need to take in, let go of what you don't need. But letting go of things we aren't good at letting go of stuff,
Yeah, all that sounds hard. That's effort. I don't want to do that.
Exactly. Who wants to put forth effort? God, I don't want to. But here we are.
What do you mean executive functions? I don't want to be an executive. So, penultimate question. Having narrowed in on these topics, why horror?
Why horror? An answer I'll take from my brother, and he isn't the first to say it by any means, but he says it pretty eloquently, is it's a safe place to step and toe the line of things that make us scared, and to get a little braver, right? To experience things that frighten us in a safe environment. Horror gives us that. It's unlikely you'll see a horror movie and be so disturbed by it that you'll come away feeling truly traumatized by the thing. You might be disturbed, but you can then process what you've seen, know that it was fiction, and sleep at night. I think that's an essential tool. I think storytelling is an essential tool of care that we give to each other and to ourselves.
Well said. So last question then, is there anything that you've thought of maybe earlier in the call that you didn't get a chance to say, or something that you think is relevant that we didn't ask about?
No, not particularly. This has been a really lovely conversation, and I really appreciate the nuance that you both have brought to it.
Actually, that was it's funny that you bring that up, because that was the secondary topic I was thinking about. That you mentioned nuance in a couple of different places. I had something in my notes here. Shoot. Intimate and nuance were two words that you brought up. I think maybe I was summarizing those under the emotional health part of it, but I remember that being something that was important to you as well.
Yeah, I suppose it's easier to understand someone when you're experiencing them in an intimate context. A conversation between three people or two people has a much better chance at having an exchange that stays away from black and white thinking than, say, an address to a nation, which is entirely black and white thinking and utterly lacks nuance. It's the difference between reality television, in which the sort of the joy of it, right, is seeing these bombastic reactions writ large that we can then judge or ridicule. Whereas if you take a nuanced scene between two people in which they're speaking about complex truths with the goal of understanding each other, it's a less dynamic scene, but it's a richer experience.
I was thinking what you said is also true. What I was thinking it was about maybe speaking to minorities, that not everybody identifies with the story that the majority identifies with, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah. Yep. And that's why we love diversity in storytelling. I know diversity is now apparently a bad word in the United States of America, but yeah, diversity in storytelling is what helps us. A, if you're seeing yourself represented, that's comforting. And then B, if you're seeing something that isn't you represented, it helps you access empathy for that experience. Yeah. And empathy, I think, is in short supply. There was a response to that bishop that took Trump to task and basically said, maybe try mercy. There was a post on X or something where I believe the poster said, do not commit the sin of empathy.
Right.
Think about that for a moment. Yeah, we have
sin
come
of
to
empathy.
a place. Yeah, but this is how far
Right? We're at the point where empathy is a sin.
Empathy is now a sin. The entire
flag on the play.
Yep.
I shared this, I think, with a couple of friends privately. What is the first teaching of Jesus?
Right?
Do unto others.
Love thy neighbor as thyself.
Yep, exactly.
This thing called empathy. It's kind of, it's kind of been a thing for a while now.
And that's the thing is it's, I at these very high political levels in which religion and politics have become inseparable, the political cruelty has won over the message of what was the basis of their religion. So now they've decided to replace the basis of their religion with their politics. And what we get is an empathyless team sport in which one tries to squish the other. And that's where we are.
That is a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Well, I do think that we got to a pretty good summary of what's important to you and why it's important to you and why horror. Thank you for your time. Before we wrap, do you want to go ahead and remind people what you're working on? And by the way, we'll create a bio page for you. I'll reach out to you after we're done here and get bio and pictures that we could use for promotional stuff, and we'll link to whatever you want to on the bio page. So feel free to share whatever.
Yeah. Right now, as I mentioned, we're working on Stephen King's Carrie. This is going to be a series adaptation over at Amazon. I can say that because it leaked in the press a couple of months ago.
I was going to say, I checked IMDb. I didn't see any trace of it. So I imagine that's either far out or...
Yeah, so I think if you Google it with like deadline in there, it'll pop up the leak anyway. So we're working on that. Other than that, though, no, that's eating up the majority of the time. The last show that I worked on is called Hysteria. You can binge that on Peacock. That's by creator Matthew Scott Kane. It's kind of a 1980s campy horror thriller about the Satanic Panic, which is a lot of fun. Bruce Campbell plays a sheriff, and that alone is a reason to watch it. It's a great show and a lot of fun. It had me at Bruce Campbell as well. And Matthew, as a creator, is just an absolutely wonderful human being with a great worldview, and crafted something that I think does great homage to a lot of the horror that we loved in the 80s and a lot of the weirdness of things like Twin Peaks. Like it's a delight of a show. So if you get a chance, check that out. And other than that, I'll be popping up at a couple of cons this year. I'll be over at Horror on Main, StokerCon, and AuthorCon this year.
StokerCon, okay.
Yeah. AuthorCon is the Scares That Care over in Williamsburg, which is a fundraiser, which I highly recommend supporting if you can. And Horror on Main, I've never been, but they had a couple of Bly Manor people there last year, and I think Rahul Kohli might be going this year with me, so that should be a lot of fun.
I hopefully will see you at Scares That Care, and it's funny that you bring that up.
Yeah, right.
So what Chris and I had decided that we wanted to do, we're coming up on our 5th anniversary, and we got a t-shirt with our logo printed on it, and we're trying to get autographs from as many of our previous guests as we could on this shirt that we'll then donate to Scares the Care to auction off for their charity.
Lovely.
I'm going to try to be there in person so I can give the shirt to them in person. If you're going to be there, would you mind maybe dropping an autograph on a shirt for them?
I'd be more than happy to. Yep, absolutely.
Awesome.
Hit me up when you're down there. I'm going to get there for the Spirited Giving event, which is the I believe the Thursday night right before things kick off.
Okay.
Which I highly recommend coming out to. I'm going to do a reading along with Brian Keene and the Midnight Pals and a couple other folks. And I think there's going to be some kind of like specialty cocktails for people who have that stuff. I'm trying to kick that this year again. Another dance with sobriety. Here we go. But it should be a good time. And between Spirited Giving and Scares That Care, I think it's going to be a fantastic weekend for the genre to really give back to the community.
We'll look forward to it, and hopefully we'll get more people out there too.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, hey, thank you again for having me. This has been a real joy.
Pleasure. And thank you for joining us. And to anybody out there listening, we didn't talk about it at the start of the call. I guess I'll wrap with this. Aside from what we're doing here at this podcast, you can also check out our side projects. Chris has his horror-themed webcomic, piecesofflesh.com. I've got a book called A Guide to the Recovery Toolbox. You can find that on Amazon. You can find links to both of those on horrormakesushappy.com. Come check us out. Tell a friend.